I'm Rachel Bell, and this is Your Last Meal, the show where usually celebrities share stories about the foods they love most, and we usually dig into the history, culture, or science of those meals with experts from around the world. But today on the program, it's the Your Last Meal presidential election episode. Food can play a significant role in politics and elections, as candidates try and show how relatable they are through the foods they eat and the restaurants they visit. Award-winning New York Times food reporter Kim Severson wrote an article this summer about Kamala Harris's cooking prowess. She wrote, quote, "Only a handful of presidents have had a keen interest in cooking, but no candidate this close to the White House has the kitchen skills of Vice President Kamala Harris."
Cooking is just a natural part of her life, and she's very seamlessly used it as part of her first presidential campaign.
Then I speak with American food scholar Casey Highsmith about presidential candidate Donald Trump's tastes.
He likes his steak really well done and with ketchup. I don't know if you've heard about his Diet Coke with a 7-step per standard operating procedure.
No, please tell me. We'll talk about what food was always present at the very first elections in the 13 colonies and have a little chuckle over some embarrassing moments from years past when a politician's public display of eating went terribly wrong. Here's a hot tip. Never have your photo taken while eating a corn dog. All right, America, let's get into it. For decades, presidential candidates have made a show of eating on the campaign trail. Pork chops on a stick at the Iowa State Fair, chili at Ben's Chili Bowl in Washington, D.C., and these outings and photo ops are strategic and calculated. But Kim Severson says there have been a few occasions when Vice President Kamala Harris has naturally exhibited her love for cooking.
Columnist from the Washington Post, Jonathan Capehart, right before Kamala was going to go on MSNBC, and he just sort of on the side asked, like, what are you cooking for Thanksgiving? And, you know, he said, my husband's bringing a fresh turkey. We don't know what to do. She goes, okay. And she's getting sound checked, right? And she's in this chair and she says,
it's getting a fresh turkey?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's being delivered
and
tomorrow.
So just little, 1 minute out. I have one
Okay,
minute.
yeah.
Kosher salt, fresh ground pepper, maybe chop up a little thyme. And then you can mix it even with, okay, so do the salt and pepper all over it, just lather that baby up, right? With on the outside in the cavity. You could also chop up, but not with the thyme, just the salt and pepper. Mix that up also with some thyme. You could even do a little rosemary if you want. Under the skin with some butter before you're going to cook it. So that butter will just melt in there. And then get a nice big bottle of cheap white wine to baste with butter. Yes, hi.
in the 30 seconds or whatever that she was getting sound checked, just went deep on this turkey recipe effortlessly. It was great. And there's just something incredibly authentic about somebody who can just bust out and tell you how to cook something.
What is that cake?
Caramel. Just Chef Jay's.
I want a slice of that. Caramel is like my favorite. Okay, chocolate and caramel? Fantastic. What are you getting?
Oh, I'm good.
No, you don't want anything sweet? You don't want anything sweet? Get something sweet.
Well, you talked about that caramel cake.
Yeah. Okay, and then a slice of the cake for the Congresswoman, and then my slice. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
In 2018, Kamala told The Cut, quote, "Everything else can be crazy. I can be on 6 planes in 1 week, and what makes me feel normal is making Sunday night family dinner. If I'm cooking, I feel like I'm in control of my life."
She was raised in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area, by a mother who is South Asian and cooked a lot, and told Kamala that if she liked to eat so much that she better learn how to cook because she likes food. And she was really steeped in that Northern California food culture, right? Chez Panisse is a favorite restaurant. And she grew up like sort of the first generation where food became a kind of cultural currency. She's really got that sort of California sensibility about how she cooks, very seasonal. She goes to the farmer's market a lot, probably not a lot right now and not a lot when she was vice president, but her Sunday meals at her house were always a big thing. And a friend who lives in Brentwood hated it when Kamala Harris was going to the farmer's market because the streets would be blocked off and there was a crowd and there was a Secret Service and they all thought it was a bunch of foolishness. Although I think secretly all the people at the farmer's market loved that she shopped there.
Totally.
She made cooking a really big part of her first run at the presidency in 2019 and 2020, and had this Cooking with Kamala little video series that she put together. Got a little bit of, bravado in the kitchen. She likes to show off and crack an egg with one hand. She's got some chops around how she cuts an onion.
In her New York Times piece, Kim says, for women, mixing cooking and politics has been fraught.
You'll remember when Hillary Clinton, her husband, was running for president, she had one of her biggest political missteps by saying, well, I could have just stayed home and made cookies, but I decided to have my own rich career, which really came back to bite her. And Good Housekeeping magazine then made a big thing out of having a cookie bake-off from the first ladies. And so she went up against Barbara Bush's oatmeal cookie. I think she did a chocolate chip cookie, but sort of had to gamely make cookies with the other first ladies, and I'm sure hated every minute of it. But it just shows you how gendered cooking can be for a woman of particular generation.
I remember when that happened, and I remember feeling annoyed that she had to do that. It's like, why are you doing this to her? And why are we still making the wives make cookies in a public arena? I didn't like it either. But it's not just Kamala in the kitchen. Minnesotan and vice presidential candidate Tim Walz has famously shared a couple of his hot dish recipes.
We're raising money off that recipe.
I know that, yeah.
It's a hot dish, all the food groups, tater tots, cream of mushroom soup, a protein, cheese.
Like many Midwestern casseroles, his new Ohm hot dish recipe calls for 2 cans of soup, cream of mushroom, and cream of cheddar. And the whole thing is topped with rows of tater tots. Tucked under the tots are brats cooked in Shell Beer, a brewery that opened in 1860 and is located in New Ulm, Minnesota, which gives meaning to the name of the dish. But Walz's turkey trot tater tot hot dish has nary a can of cream of whatever soup. It's almost all homemade. He makes a Mornay from scratch. That's a cheese sauce that starts with a roux. It didn't say Mornay in the recipe, but I just wanted to brag and show you that I know a fancy French word. There's also seasoned ground turkey, fresh green beans, but because this is still Minnesota, it's all topped with tater tots before it's baked.
If they get elected, I think we're going to be in for a revival of good old-fashioned Midwest food. So, you're going to see Juicy Lucy burgers, you're going to see hot dish, you're going to get pierogies. I'm there for that.
I think there's going to be a lot of cans of cream of mushroom soup being cracked open across the country. That's going to be the sound of their presidency.
I love that, too, he's sharing his wife's cookies. It's not the Walz cookies, it's Gwen Walz's cookies.
That's food scholar Casey Highsmith.
I know he's not writing the copy. I don't want to be, ignorant. He doesn't get all the credit for this. Whatever copywriter is doing this for him is doing a great job. And making it clear that, he's honoring his wife, and these were her grandmother's cookies. So that's like a line in the copy as well. There's some very clear tactics in how they're talking about food, whether that's targeting, white women like myself, because I'm seeing these ads and, hoping to earn that vote. Last election was not how it turned out. There were predominantly white women in my age category, 20 to 30 something, voted Republican. So maybe they're trying to reach that. There's a lot of conversations about joy in these recipes too. They talk a lot in the copy anyways. They talk about bringing joy back to politics, gathering together around food.
As the election gets closer, Kim thinks that Vice President Harris's cooking and food narrative will die down.
I don't think you'll see them leaning into food and cooking for her right now, because I think that they're going to be leaning into she can handle the nuclear codes. Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to let her do that now, because I think there's this need to show her as a statesperson and a serious candidate. And, the opposition's already coming after her as like, oh, she's goofy and she laughs and, blah, blah, blah. So it'll be very interesting to see if and when she actually does reintroduce cooking into the milieu,
So you talked about in your article other past presidents who seem to have a little bit of interest in cooking, but this was a very long time ago. And these pictures are so funny of these men in their fancy suits flipping steaks.
Oh, yeah. Eisenhower actually was a much better cook than his wife was. Mamie had cooks who cooked everything. And she came up with a few things. She always talked about having to learn to cook because Ike liked cooking so much. So she has her $1 million fudge and her, frosted mint delight, very 50s sort of food. He had a very good beef stew recipe, very good vegetable soup recipe, very famous for a steak technique in which he would take the raw steak and put it right on the embers to cook it. And made a big show of it quite often. And there's still people cook that and call it the Eisenhower steak method. Abraham Lincoln cooked a lot, but I think that was a lot out. I mean, is there nothing that Abraham Lincoln couldn't do? I'm asking. He would come home from his law office and put on an apron and help Mary Todd in the kitchen. That was somewhat out of necessity.
Lincoln was enough of a cook that there is a biography called Abraham Lincoln in the Kitchen, a culinary view of Lincoln's life and times by Ray Catherine Imee. And I am intrigued. This is going on my library list. All right, coming up after the break, what are Donald Trump's eating habits and how has he used food as a political strategy this campaign? Stick around and find out. As everyone knows, Your Last Meal is America's #1 news source, and we believe in fair and equal election coverage. So let's dig into Donald Trump's eating habits. Food scholar Casey Highsmith says food is not quite as important to the Trump campaign strategy.
We haven't seen much from the Trump side of things. We haven't seen much from J.D. Vance's wife or Melania Trump this time around. Melania was a little more involved in the previous ones, kind of going to different events with him. They never eat at any of the campaign stops that they go to, I think, which is really important. Again, it could be that they don't want to be photographed eating. Trump recently stopped at a Vietnamese restaurant and ordered a bunch of food, but then didn't eat anything in the restaurant, even though they had it kind of prepared for him to sample. Or that could go back to his standard operating procedures there. He doesn't eat anything that he hasn't vetted.
Vetting and cleanliness are very important to former President Trump when it comes to food and drink. In the introduction, Casey mentioned that he was very particular about the way he wants to be served a Diet Coke. And reports say he can drink up to 12 a day.
So evidently in his hotel, in the Trump Hotel, and I guess all of his properties, there is a standard operating procedure, an SOP, for serving Donald Trump a Diet Coke. And you can find it on the internet. I didn't memorize the steps.
This is what Business Insider reports. Even before the coronavirus pandemic, the first step involved a waiter discreetly offering a small bottle of Purell hand sanitizer for the former president, a self-described germaphobe. The waiter then greeted Trump and asked if he preferred his Diet Coke with or without ice. The third step involved the waiter presenting a polished tray with chilled bottles and glasses to be used for either of Trump's preferences. The waiter would then open the bottle of Diet Coke within sight of Trump.
It has to be a sealed container. He's got a lot of paranoia.
Next, the waiter would hold a bottle opener by the lower third and the Diet Coke in the same position while popping the bottle open. Also, I don't know if I've ever seen a glass bottle of Diet Coke.
I thought the same. I don't think I have. I'm just imagining this, well-trained wine, not a sommelier, but a waiter who's really trained in serving wine in the fancy way where they hold it in the crook of their arm, but it's a Diet Coke.
Then, once poured, the drink was then placed to the right of Trump on the dining table. The final step, the waiter had to repeat the process until the former president left the restaurant. So every single time, if he wanted a second Diet Coke, they had to do the same exact thing again.
Yeah.
It is no secret that Trump loves fast food. You might remember in 2019 when he served the Clemson Tigers, the National College Championship football team, a buffet of McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, and Domino's Pizza when they visited the White House to celebrate their win. This is a long-standing tradition that usually involves a fancier meal. And about a week and a half ago on the campaign trail, President Trump visited a McDonald's.
A McDonald's in Pennsylvania. So this individual franchise owner supported shutting down the McDonald's for a temporary amount of time. The president came in, put on an apron, turned over some fries, and then handed out food to selected, vetted group of drive-thru passengers.
Hello, how are you? What a beautiful woman. Look at her beautiful child, it's like the perfect looking person. That's good. That's your compliments. Thank you, darling. Thank you. Hi, Mom.
Good luck to
Look at Mom over there. Thank you very much. Thank you, darling. You have a great mom? Good or great? That's right. She knew what to say. Thank you very much. Thank you, darling. Wow. So nice.
Reports say the folks coming through the drive-thru were pre-selected and their cars were screened and searched. They didn't pay or choose what food would be in the bag that Trump handed them. Critics say this photo op was a dig on Kamala Harris, who has said she worked at a McDonald's for a few months in college in the early 80s. When Trump wasn't handing bags of McDonald's to customers, he answered questions from the press gathered outside the drive-thru window.
Mr. President, you actually have worked at McDonald's now versus...
Now I have worked at McDonald's. I've now worked for 15 minutes more than Kamala. Okay, she never worked here. I've now worked 15 minutes more than Kamala, so it's good. Worked at McDonald's. I'm going to say, because she's lying Kamala, that's why. Why would she lie? She shouldn't lie about it. McDonald's confirmed 4 times now she never worked here. But let's not talk about that. It's an amazing business. It's an amazing country. And we're going to make America greater than ever before.
Soon after this event, T-shirts went up for sale on his official campaign website. A photo of him leaning out the drive-thru window waving with the word MAGA Donald's underneath. If you want one, I'm so sorry. They have already sold out. After the break, the most famous food flops on the campaign trail and the most traditionally American thing that you could bake on election night. Food has been tied to elections since the original 13 colonies. Women would bake election cakes to encourage people to come out and vote.
So an election cake it's really just a fruit cake. It's what it is. It's just
they
an
kind of just
old-timey
made fruit cakes for everything back in the day.
That's exactly, yeah. Fruit cake for everything because it lasted and you could serve a lot of people. You only need a little slice. It's not the fruit cakes we think of around the Christmas time either. It's a little different. They're actually quite tasty. And women, who couldn't vote at that time, one of the ways that they could exercise their kind of civic duty and their civic, agency was by cooking for others and gathering and then maybe bending an ear after serving a slice of cake. So election cakes have a really long history.
So they would bring this cake to the town square where the election was happening.
Right. So everyone would gather to wherever the election was happening. All the little rural, farms and stuff would gather. The people would come from their farm to the city center. These would happen in like big capitals. And then when the colonies were smaller, obviously everything was happening in one spot. And women in those spaces would actually bake.
There's a recipe for election cake in the first ever U.S. cookbook, American Cookery by Amelia Simmons, published in 1796. But there is written proof that election cakes were made decades before that. The cake is kind of interesting. It is a yeasted dough, so it's kind of like a panettone, a cross between a bread and a cake. It's studded with dried fruit soaked in brandy and fragrant with cinnamon, coriander seed, and allspice. The original recipe says to mix whole wheat flour, milk, and yeast and let it sit in a cold place overnight. But modern recipes online treat it more like a bread and call for kneading and several hours of rising. The original cake was baked in a loaf pan, and today's reinterpretations often favor a bundt. If you want to make the original, authentic election cake recipe, it is posted on the Highland House Museum's website, a museum in Connecticut, which is the state that the cake is from. I will include a link in the show notes. And if you want to make one of the modern versions, there are so many of them online, from the New York Times to the Old Farmer's Almanac to a recipe with a really thorough history on californiaprunes.org. Okay, let's get to the fun part. The embarrassing stories.
Gerald Ford is very famous for trying to eat a tamale and the corn wrapper was still on it.
Yes.
If you recall that.
That's Kim. It was 1976. Gerald Ford was running for a second term, and he was in San Antonio, Texas, when he was offered a tamale at a campaign stop. Poor President Ford nearly choked trying to bite through the corn husk. And many folks speculate this is why he lost the election. Who was it that they had an incident with like a giant hot dog?
I think it might have been John Kerry. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. There's a good lesson.
It's an unfortunate picture.
I'm uncomfortable looking. I feel like I have to go to Human Resources looking at that giant hot dog in that man's mouth.
I know.
So sorry.
I need to wash my eyes out with soap.
Yeah.
Let that be a lesson to us all. The next story was not a campaign mishap, but still an embarrassing moment for a president nonetheless.
When Kennedy, I think, went to Berlin and was speaking, and then he did some, a few lines in German, and one of them was "Ich bin ein Berliner," which Berliner is not someone from Berlin. Berliner is a donut, and in German. And so there's this famous quip of him, and he, in his, I can't do the Kennedy voice, but his famous Kennedy voice, and he's like, "Ich bin ein Berliner." And
what does that translate to?
I think and I'm sure I'm butchering it too. I apologize. I haven't had German in a long time. It translates to "I am a donut."
June 26, 1963, one of the best known speeches of the Cold War and among the most famous anti-communist speeches.
Yeah.
These are all moments that make presidents look foolish or unrelatable. But there is one very relatable food that it seems all presidents can agree on. Whether they are Republican or Democrat, it seems presidents have one thing in common: a big love for cheeseburgers. Before he went vegan, President Clinton was known for scarfing down jalapeno cheeseburgers. President Barack Obama loved burgers so much, the Washington Post published an article in 2014 titled "President Obama and Cheeseburgers, a Love Story." And fast food-loving President Donald Trump has been photographed eating a McDonald's burger on Air Force One. A few years ago, the White House Historical Association published a cookbook called Recipes from the President's Ranch. It was written by Matthew Wendell, who cooked for President George Bush and his family at Camp David and at their Crawford, Texas ranch the entire time he was in office. And one of the meals he made most, at the family's request, was cheeseburgers.
Mrs. Bush had a very specific way she liked them as well. She liked a smoky cheeseburger. Instead of putting the barbecue sauce on the burger and making it messy to eat, I decided to try the barbecue sauce inside the meat, mixed in the meat. And that way you could get that good smoky barbecue flavor without having the mess of the barbecue sauce running down your fingers. And that's important, especially if you're a world leader and you don't want to seem messy when you eat and you're discussing world problems with the other leaders. She liked the patty very thin, cooked medium as well, with very sharp cheddar cheese on top and a whole wheat bun that is toasted with all your lettuce, tomato, onions, pickles.
But this wasn't just a backyard barbecue family meal. This was a dish served to foreign dignitaries. It was strategic. A cheeseburger is casual. It leveled the playing field. And it was a food that foreign leaders from around the world were excited to eat, because they were eating an all-American cheeseburger with the President of the United States.
I served them a lot at Camp David because they just meant home to them. And we started serving them to world leaders who would visit for lunch. Back during the administration, Prime Minister Abe came to visit the president at the White House, and they bonded over cheeseburgers. It was an AP reporter in Tokyo who wrote this article called Cheeseburger Diplomacy. And he talked about how the two men bonded over a meal of cheeseburgers, American cheeseburgers. Prime Minister Abe was, I guess, impressed that such a simple meal could bring them together. And so we started having them for lunch for all our visitors because in some way they expected, let's have just a cheeseburger and we can have our feet under the same table, enjoy the same meal, and get some diplomacy done.
And that was the 2024 Your Last Meal presidential election episode. The election is on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. Please get out and vote. If you happen to live in Washington State and you're looking for a non-biased guide for how to cast your vote, we have one for you at Cascade PBS. Just Google Cascade PBS Voter Guide. Your Last Meal is a product of Seattle's Cascade PBS. This episode was produced with Maliha Syed and mixed and mastered by Sarah Bernard. Original theme music by Prom Queen. And I created, host, and co-produce Your Last Meal. Next week, we'll be back to the usual format with a very special guest. I was incredibly excited to interview this person, and I am just as excited for you to hear the interview. Make sure you're subscribed to Your Last Meal so you never miss an episode. I have a lot going on in my world right now, and I'd like to invite you to come out to a bunch of events. Number one, I'm doing a super fun event in Seattle on November 20th called Food Fight with Cascade PBS. It's going to be kind of like a game show with food trivia, interactive games, prizes. Your ticket includes some tasty bites, and I'm going to be wearing sequins. So please come and look at my sequined outfit. Tickets are going fast. Get yours now. You can find a link in the show notes or in the link tree in my bio on Instagram at Hello Rachel Bell, Belle. And number two, my cookbook, Open Sesame, is out on November 12th, and I have a handful of events in the Pacific Northwest. Everything from sit-down book talks to farmers market cooking demos. There's going to be a fun open house at a very cute wine bar in Seattle called Half Seas. That is free. And I will be at the iconic Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon in December. That is also free. So find a link in the show notes or go to my website, hellorachelbell.com, and you can click on the book events tab. If you never want to miss out on any of this information, sign up for my newsletter, rachelbell.substack.com. I'm Rachel Bell, and this is Your Last Meal. Maybe I'll make one. I like to do pun food, and I was trying to think what I know for the last election we made sloppy Joe Biden's, but I can't remember what else we did, like for Kamala, really, but got to come up with a good Kamala food pun.